And so the point starting at 12 o'clock, starting at the top, is really focused on your strategy.
Yeah.
So strategy, everything from mission, purpose, core values, strategic planning as a process. So that's one component of the STAR model. So if you keep going around the STAR model, so the 5-point strategy, then structure, people, rewards, and processes. Then if there were points going internally instead of externally, it would actually be the middle of it would be culture.
Yeah.
And all of those things, what happens in a lot of the companies we deal with, let's say a 75-person company that's growing at a rapid pace, what you'll find is a lot of those points now are all disconnected. There's nothing aligns with their strategy to their processes on the HR side, to their reward systems. And so it's almost like it's a very confusing message. They were good at what they did, so therefore let's promote them into being a leader.
Yep.
And they're just thrown in the deep end.
It's a totally different competence.
Right.
Hey everybody, and welcome to the Marketing Blender Show. I'm Dacia Coffey, and today I have a very special guest host. Mark Mitford is the CEO of HR Catalyst. Now, I brought Mark on because not too long ago, well, maybe a couple years ago, actually, we started getting invited in naturally to some of our clients' people problems. Now, all of a sudden, they're asking us, well, can we use marketing to target certain types of talent? And well, you guys just helped us with the core values. So how do we scale that inside of our culture? And that was really exciting. And so we have been building this work for a while, but very quickly, people problems get outside of the lane of marketing. And it has been a very exciting journey to bring you into the strategic fold and to partner with you, where now we're starting to explore how do you use best practices from both HR as well as marketing for your internal customer. And this gets me so fired up because being good to the people that are good to your customers, I mean, it's a predictable break when you're growing revenue, that once the revenue system and machine is really churning, the people problems are going to start showing up, and the people systems or lack of systems, that, all of a sudden we're going to start seeing problems. And so it's been such a rewarding journey to be able to share some clients together and really start learning about what's possible and like a new type of value that the market is seeking around this. So yeah, people problems preventing revenue growth.
Well, thanks for having me, first of all, Dacia. So, and that's it, because when you look at from a financial perspective, the biggest component on your balance sheet is your people expenses.
Yeah.
So your payroll, all your benefits, your vacation or PTO, 401k match, all those components can equal anywhere between, depending on the industry, 50 to 75% of your revenue, of your cost basis can be people expenses.
Yeah.
And so we're a big fan of one of our tagline is really optimizing people performance.
Yeah, nice.
So it's really about how do you do that, because so many companies, especially with companies in the lower middle market space, really unfortunately have no clue what they're doing.
Yep. And
they just do some basic tactical things around people, and there's got to be so much more if you really want to optimize the performance, the level of engagement, and things like that.
And I think you're hitting on something so important. It really doesn't matter if we're talking about a small, aggressively growing company where it's 10 people or 15 or 20, or we're talking mid-market, couple hundred, or starting to get up to the couple thousand. There are very consistent themes. And I think the number one theme that rises up for me is don't learn everything the hard way when it comes to your people. And I'm speaking from experience, of leading a growing company by fits and starts, and I think I have stumbled across this. And so it's been personally rewarding in addition to being excited about bringing value to the clients. But I mean, I think this one's just really hard, to think about. So, going back for me, what was happening for us originally, like how this first developed, was we build these brand message playbooks and we would be building buyer personas. Who are the people that make or break your success? And that was always the open-ended question. And typically it was decision makers and, a conversation about sales process and untapped markets and expansion. Great. Very straightforward for about the first 7 to 8 years. And then all of a sudden, one client and then another client would say, does it make sense? Are we allowed to talk about we need to really recruit a specific role? in our company if this starts working? And we were like, no, that makes total sense. Let's do that. So on like just organically, instead of only documenting buyer personas, we started being asked to document a talent persona. And so then we started realizing we should always ask clients, do we need to document a talent persona? And in the beginning, that was enough. Like it was enough to talk about prospective employees, future recruits, and who they were as human beings to kind of open up the conversations in the company. And we would be like, that was fun. Good luck. Bye. And then of course, like I'd mentioned earlier, we did core values. Now we were doing core values to make sure that the branding was authentic. And then we started being asked, well, how do we roll this out internally? Like, can we do a launch plan or a go to market for internally? And we thought, yeah, actually, like we can deploy this in some very specific ways. Right. And so it was interesting how it developed. And there was so much alignment around marketing to an external customer and marketing to an internal customer. But what we realized is while we can attract talent, or we can really do a beautiful and honorable job communicating culture, communicating core values, that was a one and done thing. Like we couldn't build the marketing systems that we do for external customers for an internal customer, right. Which is when I was like, oh boy, I'm in the deep end. And because I started realizing there's HR processes, there's hiring processes, there's recruitment, and I can talk to those leaders, but I can't give them a plan. And I don't want to learn on their dime. And that's why I called you, being like, Mark, I think I have an opportunity and I really need to learn from you really fast or make a couple of introductions really aggressively in order to take this across the finish line. And so what was it for you? Were you surprised or were you like, like marketing's getting involved? Like, what was that like for you when you first got that phone call?
Sure. It was kind of interesting at first because it was almost like a head scratcher.
Yeah.
Because part of it was really going back to marketing is external, HR is internal.
Yeah.
And the two will typically not meet. And then as organizations in the last, let's say 5, 10, 15 years have really progressed around talent attraction and retention, around looking at different components of engagement with their employees.
Yeah.
I think that's where maybe the two of them, and it's just kudos to you for being able to think that way, just to say, you know what, there's some common connection points between marketing and the HR function, and the two really need to be, there's a place where they do meet in the middle.
Yeah.
And so I think maybe that was the purpose when originally we talked about this a couple of years ago.
It absolutely was. And I think one of the things that you shed so much light on for me was our clients were saying, okay, we've got an issue recruiting enough talent, or we're not finding enough talent, or we don't know how to reach them, or we're smaller and everybody's going to the big enterprise competitor and we need those folks. And ironically, it didn't matter. We work with both manufacturers that have both white collar and blue collar, so hourly and salaried. And then we also have scenarios where it's all white collar, mostly tech industry, where we're helping with them. So, but their point of view was talent persona, somebody we haven't met yet, somebody we need to attract. And one of the big aha moments for me that came with the rolling out of core values and then digging into the metrics, because I'm a total numbers nerd when it comes to return on investment, and asking myself in integrity, can we actually drive value that a client should pay for on this side? I started digging into the numbers, their numbers, and oftentimes I just thought, well, if they would stop losing employees, this would be a lot easier. And when we started engaging, your focus was very much like, even though I kept saying recruiting and talent attraction and employer brand, you were like, and reducing employee churn and talent retention. And I thought that's why I could tell I was out of my depth, because I didn't even think about that application of that's where all the broken process is. Right. And like, that's where the alignment really has to happen. So do you see that a lot? Are you seeing an overemphasis on recruitment instead of retention, or is that just because we are so externally customer focused?
No, I think a lot of companies they're really struggling with that still.
Do they realize it?
Some do, some don't.
Okay.
And I think some of them are really because they don't understand, they probably haven't looked at the business case behind it.
Yeah.
And so part of it is every time you bring on a new employee, on average, and again, this is just a generic average number, it costs you anywhere between $5,000 to $10,000 to bring on one person.
Yeah.
And of course, if they're in a more senior role, a very technical role, it's significantly higher than that. So I think that a lot of times they were just like, that's frustrating for them, but they've never really looked at the other side of the other side of the equation.
Yeah.
To say that what if I increase my retention rate, then of course that's going to lower my turnover rate and lower my recruiting costs.
Yeah.
And it seems like it's so basic, but of course I've lived in this world for a long time. And so it seems it's very cut and dry to me, but I'm just like, well, let's also focus on what is your talent retention strategy?
Yep.
And a lot of times it looks, they'll say, well, what do you mean? And it's almost like I've got two heads or something like that.
Yeah.
So when you think
Yeah.
talent retention, what are you really talking about? And there's all these facets to talent retention that we can help organizations work on and really think. And a lot of it, and I always go back to, if I had a nickel for every time I said it, HR is not rocket science. It really is doing a lot of common sense things well.
I feel like that about marketing.
I'd be living on an island, so.
But I know, because I say that about marketing. Like, it's logical.
Yeah.
It's about human beings. It's about empathy and walking in their shoes. I do not have that. Like, the HR and the people problems, they're problematic. Like, they're really difficult just because when you don't have that framework to look at it, I always say, and it's, I'm stealing a more famous quote, but, the quality of the question determines the quality of the answer.
Sure.
And so I feel like that when it comes to the people problems is, that me and other leaders don't know what questions we should actually be asking. And that was a perfect example of, a shift from, okay, how do we improve our recruitment and how do we attract better talent? How do we attract larger volumes of talent versus how do we have a total overall system that increases retention, lowers recruiting costs, and brings in top quality talent that then up-levels the entire team, not just this. And you've referred to it in one of our sessions together as a revolving door. And I thought, that is exactly what you see is one person in, but one person out. And like, there's no net gain. There's no net value. And that's so dangerous for a growing company because you can't scale tribal knowledge. You can't scale culture. And if you lose a very profoundly important person out of apathy, oh my gosh, like the cost to replace them, you probably do know how to measure this. I don't know how to measure that when somebody's very critical to your organization.
Right. It's so true, and the cost, depending on how technical the person is, it could easily get into six figures without even breaking a sweat. So this person is a really, and I kind of grew up in the telecom industry when I was corporate, and to lose a specific engineer that's in a strategic role, it could easily be 200, 300,000 plus investment that you're losing, especially if that person's been there, 5-10 years.
Yeah.
And a lot of companies just think, well, we just got to go find another person to fill their role, but they don't know the tribal knowledge.
Exactly.
They don't know how to get things done efficiently, and so take that number and multiply it numerous times, and that's the number of that knowledge base and the productivity base that you're losing with one strategic person that you lose on any specific team.
Wow. So we've got a sometimes quantified, but quantifiable dollar amount lost internally to your productivity and your team performance and what they represented. Then you've got a quantified cost around how much it takes to hire and the manpower and Indeed or whatever you're deploying. And then on top of that, there's the onboarding, training, and cost of getting that new employee up to productivity level that is at least decent, let alone, to what that person was. I mean, that's a lot of numbers. Like, why people need to start prioritizing this and thinking about it holistically.
Right. And that to your point, it's, to have a person come on board, especially if they are in something that is a strategic role, it could easily take them 6-12 months or longer to become fully productive.
Yeah.
And in some cases, too, that a company so many companies and organizations we work with do, their onboarding process is one day.
Yeah.
And that's all they do around onboarding.
Yeah.
They put you down at your office or your cubicle, wish you the best of luck. And it's one of those things. And when you do a poor onboarding process, a lot of statistics will say there's a 4 to 5 times greater likelihood that that person will leave within the first 12 months.
Ouch.
And so
Oh,
when you think about
yeah.
a good onboarding process that's at least 12 weeks in length, and then doing quarterly touch bases or things like that, it not only helps to onboard the person better and assimilate them to your culture and all the unwritten rules of getting things done,
Yeah.
but it also is the added bonus that no company has a foolproof, 100% foolproof plan for hiring the right person.
Yeah.
So a lot of people
Isn't that the truth?
they're just awesome at interviewing,
Yep.
and then you're almost like, okay,
Marketers are awesome at interviewing, being professional communicators.
Sure.
Salespeople are awesome at interviewing. Yeah, good point.
And so,
Yeah.
and it's like, okay, how come their twin brother or sister showed up at the job today? Because this is not the person we hired or that we interviewed.
Yeah.
And so sometimes even that good onboarding process, and you hope it doesn't happen that way, but you can identify warning signs very early.
Yeah.
Where sometimes you have a poor hire, and it takes 6, 12, 18 months to figure out they're really not that good.
Yeah.
And then by then you've invested all this time, effort, and energy, and possibly a lot of training dollars into that individual, and then you decide, we've got to let them go because they're really not going to work out.
And it's very hard for leaders to let go of that sunk cost.
Sure.
Like most don't. They will just try to make it work,
Right.
make it work, and yeah, I mean, it's very detrimental, but it's hard to see because of all of that. You're like, surely we didn't get everything wrong.
Right. So I think a lot of times the companies, especially the leaders who are involved in the hiring process, they're a little bit biased.
Yeah.
That they're really biased. That I knew we did a great interview, we did assessments on them, we did all these things right.
Yeah.
So how did we get it so wrong? And quite often they just don't want to admit it because it's a little bit of an ego thing, that they're really not that good. And just like anything else in life, interviewing is a skill.
Yes.
And to become a good interviewer, you just have to learn and you have to know some of the basics, because it's not something that you're taught how to. You just don't magically become a good interviewer. It's something you have to learn over time and just actually go through trial and error to become good at it. Take some classes. We help organizations and their managers become really good interviewers. And our philosophy too is because of the fractional type of HR work we do. We want to teach them how to fish.
Yeah.
We don't want to continue to feed them because that's great, but we want to actually teach them how to fish. So at some point we may actually disengage, and that person, that organization would be well equipped to do their job successfully without us playing a larger role within their organization.
Yeah, we have another prospective shared client soon, and he was telling me about that, how you guys engaged for a while, really strengthened his firm, and they grew, and now they're back.
Right, sure.
Because they need you again, but that's exactly what happened with them, which was so cool. So I want to talk about, I'm thinking about what you're talking about, and I'm like, let's take everybody kind of through cradle to grave, like the experience. And I want to share with the audience your STAR model, because I think they need to be thinking like, oh, okay, here's the difference. But
Sure.
I want just to give everybody kind of a paradigm shift around if you're thinking as your employee, as your, prospective employee, what are some of the touch points, and like, how does that marketing or communications alignment happen with HR? And then we'll move into the process and how to really make this people problem scenario become a people competency that
Right.
strengthens the organization. Sound good?
Great.
Okay, awesome. So I had mentioned earlier that we will document talent personas, because you're not trying to attract anybody that can handle that job. You're trying to attract a very specific personality and culture fit, core values alignment fit to your organization that's going to get up to speed faster and really be somebody that represents you guys well and strengthens your team across the board. So the reason, we focus on talent personas, just like we do buyer personas, is because if you're thinking about a human being, then you can create resonance, and then you can explore their journey like talent journey, if you will. And so for me, I think about it, I go, okay, so they're looking for a job. Doesn't matter if it's white collar or blue collar.
Sure.
They're very predictable places that type of person with that type of background or that type of lifestyle go to look for. So then you need to be in those places, whether it's Indeed, whether it's certain, shows or hiring events. I mean, there's even different marketing tools that you can deploy to reach these people and influence them. And what was their first brand impression? And I get really fired up about an employer brand impression because you want to scare the joy killers and the profit suckers. You want to scare them away.
Right, sure.
And you want other people to be like, oh, I would love that.
Right.
So like, for instance, some people love a challenging, hard driving environment. Great. And the other people where they would be like, I would never want that intensity. We want to broadcast that honestly.
Right, right.
You are going to thrive if you are here. And that brand impression and basically holding up a mirror for people to go, wow, those people look like me, sound like me, talk like me. I think I'll fit in with them. And for me, it's about resonance and just being really intentional about how you steward a reputation and what you stand for. So while that brand needs to parallel the customer experience, it's a different audience.
Right,
and
sure.
we use different words and we have a different brand promise for the people that will make or break our success when they're part of our team. So for you, when you're thinking about that, like, are there any additional things that you would add to that, when you're thinking initial impressions and how they can help or hurt, or any, process or structure type of things people need to be thinking about when recruiting?
Well, I think one of the key things is it really would go back to, and I love your thought process around talent persona, because it really goes back to what do you want that experience to be?
Yeah.
Especially when they're interviewing, because there's a couple of times we have clients that you go to their office and they're not in a great part of town, and their office does not, it's
industrial or
it's industrial
whatever.
And it doesn't show well. So what can you do? What are the things you can do to overcome that?
Yeah.
Because a lot of times it is that one of those things, that first impression is so critical to and it's just psychological. It's always back to the first impression and last impression. When you're actually trying to recruit somebody, make sure you do a really good job of first impression and tell them about we even go back to some things, especially if the company's been around for 30, 40, 50 years.
Yeah.
Go back to the history of the company.
Yeah.
I was just over and we're visiting with a prospect who's probably going to become a client soon. And they've been around for 75 years. And they are in not a great area of East Dallas. But it's just interesting looking, and they had a timeline in their lobby talking about all the big milestones they've had and some of the great work they've done, because they're in a very specific industry, and they do a lot of work in the defense business.
Yeah.
So it's just fascinating just to see, because, while you're waiting to interview, I'm sure 90% of the people come in and they just start looking around, or actually walking around the lobby and following because the business started right after World War II.
Amazing.
So it's just fascinating just to see that as a first impression.
Yeah.
Because they are in an older, not in a great neighborhood. They've got barbed wire around some of the fencing.
Yeah, super common.
It doesn't show that well, but when you look at those markers and that history, then that's really just is so fascinating.
Yeah.
And so even just little things like that.
Yeah.
But also, I would say, going back to we did an article on our blog recently which talked about the job description does not equal a job posting.
No.
So,
oh, gosh, yes. Please talk to people about the difference, because I could not agree more. I love that you're bringing this up.
Yeah, it's because a job description it's an HR tool.
Yeah.
And it really goes back into some things about the qualifications. It really just it focuses on, here's what the job itself is high level. Then it goes into qualifications, the type of experience you need, years of education, possibly if it's a technical job, all the certifications you need, so on and so forth.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And so then what we try to do then, if we help a company with their job posting, is really get into that first thing you want to do is that whole thing around marketing.
Yes.
And really talk about the company history and the dynamic growth and everything that's going on there, because we want to make sure that the key thing is, even if it's, and some studies will say that even if it's a longer job posting, as long as you put really good information regarding the opportunity, regarding how competitive, the type of environment and the company's culture, their type of benefits and things like that, then that's really going to resonate with that individual who's possibly going to be attracted to actually apply for the job.
At the Marketing Blender, we have fractional CMOs and outsourced marketing teams to drive your success. The two most common problems that we are approached about is how do we break revenue plateaus and accelerate success, or how do we attribute marketing to revenue impact? And the answer is that we build a system, because your marketing should be driving revenue, it should be driving your reputation, and it should be driving resilience. If you want to learn more, check out themarketingblender.com. There are times where, and for me on the marketing side, obviously what you show if you're at a career fair or something really, really important. You can deploy social media ads for this, and people don't realize that's not Indeed or the other ones are not the only things out there. There's just so many, LinkedIn obviously, but there's other things that you can do to influence. So getting into that hiring experience, I love what you're talking about, about people's first impression, because their first impression is also what that interview process was like. And so I want to give two examples and then cue it up for you.
Sure.
So for instance, for our clients that are hiring hourly workers, they need a job now. They need a paycheck now. They are not going to tolerate a 3-month or even oftentimes a 3-week interview process when they need to feed their families. And so that is a very different thing. So for me, being really matching the interview style to what these candidates need, matching the pace to the role, and really thinking about, okay, what does this represent and how do we put our best foot forward to serve them well? Serves us well too, because if you have a quick pace, then you can really make sure that you're capturing qualified, interested candidates and not losing them to someone else. And there are technology components that can be plugged in to speed that up, to integrate with HR processes, and to not let systems and internal things slow down that candidate experience. So, obviously there needs to be some thoughtfulness about doing that well, but I always really like making sure that people remember, they are judging you nonstop, and other competitors are trying to get that talent as well. So then it gets over into hiring. So talk us through how important is the structure of the hiring process? Not obviously not to the hiring manager and the hiring team, but to the candidates themselves.
Yeah, I think I think on the hiring side, so once you've gone through the selection process, once you've actually decided on this is an individual you want to make an offer to, the person has accepted the offer, you set a date they're going to start. Making sure, I think, as basic as it would be, having a buddy, having somebody that would be a buddy, a mentor, whoever it's going to be, that would be somebody, because sometimes when a company is growing tremendously, what happens is you find the person who's really available. And sometimes they're one of your B or C players. So I use the analogy. I'm a very poor golfer on a good day. But if you're learning how to play golf, don't learn from a person that stinks at golf. Don't learn from your buddy who stinks at golf, because guess what? You're also going to stink.
Misery loves company.
You're going to stink at golf too, because you're going to do everything that you shouldn't do. So that's why the classic example of, make sure you take lessons, even though they're expensive. Take a lesson from a professional, because if your buddy may be great and they're free, but there's a reason they're free, because, and especially if they're not a good player, they will not be able to do a good job of coaching you. But just having, and just some of the basics of, the first day, you got to do the paperwork stuff, sure, but forget it, the paperwork stuff gets done in an hour or two. Making sure you do an orientation, an overview of the history of the company. The culture of the company, even just some of the just some of the basics around, dress code, the breaks and things like that. But ideally do a team lunch.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
be
for
able to do
sure.
a team lunch. And if they are hourly, it's challenging because sometimes you can't pull everybody, especially if they're in a manufacturing or production facility.
But
But bring a couple of people together for lunch with them, and ideally people that have been there for a while.
yeah,
Do that with the manager, and then really ideally on that first day or the first week, outline what's going to happen within an onboarding process.
yeah, yeah,
Here's how we're going to teach you how to do the job here. Because in some cases, we work with a client not too far from here. They probably have 30% of their staff as welders. But just because you're a welder and you've got 10 years experience, sometimes you've learned some really bad habits.
sure.
So, so you've really got to, in some cases, it's like a dog. You have to unlearn them from some of the bad habits and then retrain them the correct way to do things.
And that happens early. You cannot
Right.
go back and do that a year later, maybe even
Exactly.
6 months later. I mean, like you set the expectations. Yeah.
And some of the companies, it even goes back to the core thing of safety.
Yep.
They're not following safety programs and processes because they worked in a little bit of a slap shop operation and they were never really taught. It was just like, get the work done as quickly as you
Yes.
can. So
Yes.
quality was not an emphasis because of the kind of work they did. But in some cases, the quality of the welding has to be so critical that it's almost like it's somewhat of a surgeon because it's got to be, they're welding very complex materials, or the welds can't be showing and can't be all lumpy. Just weird things like that. But making sure you get that person, you set them up to be successful
Exactly.
versus you set them up to be, we hope they're successful, versus ensuring them. And even on the onboarding process, a good thing to do is ask people that are new hires, ask them once they've been there for 3 months
Yeah.
or 6 months, talk to them about what do you wish we did earlier
Oh,
with you.
that's brilliant. Love that.
And just doing that best practice with them. So if you could help us reshape the onboarding process, what things are we missing and what things should we change up to be even more successful at what we do?
I absolutely love that. And, it's interesting. We're rolling out some core values and some culture initiatives with a client that I just recently
Right,
introduced
sure,
you to.
sure.
And we're going to be talking to the HR team about how they'll, like how this influences their hiring approach, because the core values need to be in there. And then one of the major things that we do every time is, how does this change onboarding? So core values and expected behavior, and how do you recognize character inside of our company? How do we define it? And it again, like helping people unlearn, especially if they came from a really rotten environment.
Right.
Like some people have been hurt, you know what I mean? And so they're defensive, or they bring habits that they had to build. And so then that early setting of expectation around who we are, what you can trust, what you can believe in, so important. And then having the collateral, having the tools. We love videos where the leaders are talking
Right.
about their stories and what core values mean to them. And then I love that you're basically choreographing. There's a specific welcome. There's a specific type of check-in on both sides of the fence. At 3 months, I love that bit. It's just being so intentional. And that's really what you're talking about, is planning how
Right.
it's going to go. Not just being like, oh man, we should have done that, or maybe we should do this. Like, not reinventing the wheel every single time a person joins a new team.
Sure.
Yeah.
And that's why, and I worked quite a bit of my career, my corporate life was spent in the Fortune 100, Fortune 50 space.
Yeah.
And I just go back to what we try to do with, and our value proposition is, if you want to scale your business, you have to create and design core processes in HR. So everything is it's going to be the same thing time and time. Hiring,
Yep.
that should be a core process that's well documented. Termination should be a core process. Promotional increases, performance reviews,
Yeah.
compensation reviews, all of those things should be very systematic.
Yes.
And that's going to be, with any business, the way you scale is you create systematized processes that are scalable, that are repeated, that are well documented. So that's where our value prop comes into really helping companies scale their business and all the facets of the people process side of the equation.
And I think that's huge, because that's exactly what happened in our engagements. Why we brought you in was because we can help with all the words. We set up internal newsletters to communicate major information, and we can make it beautiful. We can do the signage, we can do the onboarding collateral and everything that wraps around the customer experience. But that's the point, is it wraps around an experience that is actually a process.
Right.
And that's when it was like, wow. And so some of the other interesting things that I've really learned from you and that has been so rewarding watching roll out, you've done leadership training, because then that's how you distribute core values, how you distribute behavior, how you distribute those processes consistently without micromanaging,
Right.
So I mean,
Sure.
really allowing people to thrive and develop. But at the risk of just going into specific details, you really have a very specific model around how do you scale people. And so talk to us about the STAR model, because I had already promised them that you would
Okay.
you would give away a little bit of your secret sauce.
No, and it's not secret sauce by any means. So the STAR model, I started the business in 2013. So it's actually very blessed that we're getting ready to finish year 11, which again is hard to believe. So, but really the STAR model was one of those core things that I created when on the front end of the business. And it really is focused on, so the STAR model, so if you can visualize, a star with 5 points. And so the point starting at 12 o'clock, starting at the top, is really focused on your strategy.
Yeah.
So strategy, everything from mission, purpose, core values, strategic planning as a process. So that's one component of the STAR model. So if you keep going around the STAR model, so the 5-point strategy, then structure, people, rewards, and processes. On the middle of the STAR is culture. So everything from your strategy, your structure, your people, rewards, and processes. Then if there were points going internally instead of externally, it would actually be the middle of it would be culture.
Yeah.
And all of those things, what happens in a lot of the companies we deal with, let's say a 75-person company that's growing at a rapid pace, what you'll find is a lot of those points now are all disconnected. There's nothing aligns with their strategy to their processes on the HR side, to their reward systems. And so it's almost like it's a very confusing message to employees.
For sure. And leadership.
Right. Because, and a lot of leaders, when you get into that leadership side and leadership training, a lot of in the companies we deal with, lower middle market, typically 5 to 75 million revenue.
Yep.
A lot of times their leaders have never been given 1 ounce of leadership training of how to lead people.
Yeah.
They're just like that classic example of they were good at what they did, so therefore let's promote them into being a leader.
Yep.
And they're just thrown in the deep end.
It's a totally different competency.
Right.
Completely.
And it is, and sometimes it's as basic as they're not doing things in a compliant fashion.
Yeah.
Especially when they're interviewing.
Yeah.
And they're interviewing a young female. Oh, are you married? Are you going to have kids soon?
Yeah.
Ding, ding, ding. Don't
Already
ask about
made me
that. So, just all these things that you just, I just want to get to know you as a person. And these are just some natural questions I would ask you. Well, no, don't ask those questions during an interview, because if you decided not to select that person and she says, yeah, well, actually I have 2 kids at home right now and we're thinking about having another one. Okay, well, you're going to probably have 3 kids, then you won't be dependable. Your kids are going to be sick all the time. You'll be distracted all the time.
Yep.
So I'm not going to hire you. Well, that's why you don't ask those type of questions.
Exactly.
So everything from as basic as interview questions. And then the other reason is the number one thing, just on a slight tangent, but the number one reason people leave an organization is typically, I do not trust or respect my direct boss.
Yeah.
So it doesn't matter how good and how solid your executive team is. Most employees, especially in a company with 100, 200, 500 people,
Yeah.
they don't have very little line of sight to the executive team.
Yeah.
They see leadership as, this is my boss.
Yeah.
And I see my boss as a leader. And if my boss stinks at their job, or is somebody I can't trust or respect, or has favorites within the team or what have you, that a lot of times will directly impact to a person leaving an organization, because
Absolutely.
they really feel like, and that goes back to the company. And so a lot of times it's what we try to focus on around leadership training is, let's help to equip those first line second line, those first line middle managers to be successful at their job, building trust, building a good team, helping them some things around motivation,
Yep.
some things around change management. So a lot of it goes back into what can we do to equip those first line, second line leaders to be successful?
Yeah.
Because those are the people that have direct connection to the employee base. And if they have a bad experience with their employee, I don't care how good your culture is, they may still get very confused and disoriented and disenchanted.
Yep.
And then engagement goes down. And then at some point, a lot of times then they just buff and polish their resume and they're out the door.
Exactly. And, it's such a great point because there's another growing, trend that we're seeing out there around people don't want to work for an employer where there's no career path,
Right.
where they will not be developed. And so what I love is when you do this well, it's this virtuous cycle that you've got management that is now scaling processes and culture and, and assisting. And there's a development process where people are growing personally in their leadership capabilities and capacity, and that there is a pathway
Right.
to growth. And that makes you a stickier and more
Sure.
resonant employer as well. And so I love that there's just a win-win all around by doing that really intentionally.
And there is currently, and now there's actually a sixth generation in the workforce that's just starting out.
Yeah.
They're the teenagers,
Yeah.
so that's Gen Alpha. So now we still have everything from baby boomers all the way down to Gen Alpha.
Is that their new name? I hadn't.
Yeah.
Okay, good
Yeah.
to know.
It's so Gen Alpha, probably they're going to be more in your fast food
Yep.
type of,
Sure.
summer job
Yeah.
after school, what have you. So they're probably getting from about 16 to 20, but that's the next generation. But
Yeah.
your Gen Zs, so that next generation up, your early 20s,
Yep.
and then your millennials are slowly taking over the workforce.
Yes.
And how they define work to them is highly different than a baby boomer.
Absolutely.
Because a baby boomer was 30 years at a company, put your head down, grind it out, good things will happen to you, and you'll work whatever hours you need to get the job done. Whereas the Gen Zs and millennials they want to understand about career growth and career development.
Yeah.
Because if they're really putting their head down and they're not seeing promotional opportunities every few years, then they're probably going to be out the door.
That's right. Exactly.
And it's really challenging for those companies that have 50 people or 75 people or 200 people to really define a career path. We're actually working with a construction client over in Dallas now, helping them actually create salary bands and job grades, whatever you want to call them, but almost visualize a staircase.
Yeah. Yeah.
And really, how do we create that and show them, instead of a manager saying, well, just continue to work hard, continue to grind it out, you're doing great, and you'll get a promotion soon.
Yeah.
Versus here's what your career level is now, and for you to get to that next level, here's the types of things you need to work on and the types of proficiencies or competencies you need to gain
Yeah.
to be able to be ready for that next level.
I love it.
And so it's much more of a defined answer versus just continue to work hard and we'll take care of you.
Exactly. I love it. And I just get so excited, obviously, about how you wrap communication around that, which
Sure.
then breeds consistency and really cements it. But so important. And I mean, again, I'm going to sound like a broken record, but I just love how intentional this is. And this leads to higher profits and faster growth.
Right.
Period. Because now you've got an aligned team that's fired up, that's really ready to serve the customer really well, that is motivated and has a clear path to their own prosperity. And you're attracting people that fit the mold, and all of
Right.
this. And then you're lowering costs of recruitment and turnover. I mean, there's just so much goodness versus it being all over. And one thing that you said earlier that just really struck a chord with me, is that culture component. Because at the end of the day, who does own culture? Because I heard somebody talk about the fact that you'll know what your real culture is by paying attention. If you had a hidden camera, for instance, in your office, it's how your team acts when leadership's not around. That's the real culture.
Right.
Like it's what actually happens when, and so some people say, oh, well, leaders dictate culture. Well, but do they own it all? Like that's impossible. And so then how do you scale, this very difficult, intangible thing called culture that makes or breaks your
Right.
success? So it's really exciting, and it's been really rewarding just seeing that there are structured pieces of progress that have both monetary, impact as well as legacy impact to get to be a part of. I love it.
That's fascinating. No, it's a great point because, at the end of the day, to your question, woven in there was around, and when you look at culture and who owns it, it's really, the leadership sets the culture.
Yeah.
The leadership has to be very intentional about clearly defining the culture that they want.
Yeah.
And then it goes down to other levels of leaders to be really the ones who are beating that drum constantly. And when I look at how does HR fit in there, in some companies, they've defined it as the keeper of the culture.
Right.
And a little bit of it goes back to that star model. And so what are you doing? What are you doing around the different points of the star to continue to point back? Because a lot of times companies, when they talk about culture, they talk about the North Star.
Yeah.
So what is your company's North Star? And how do you make sure that everything you're doing really focuses back on your North Star? Because that's what your guide point and the North Star, you follow that during the best of times within the company and also the worst of times within the company.
Yes.
And that's where a lot of companies they say, let's throw out the culture and when the times are bad. So no, that's when you really need to lean on your culture. And even if you have to make very challenging decisions regarding your employee base and things like that, you still focus on this is why we're doing this, because this fits our culture and it's not opposing our culture because your culture can't, it's like a super tanker. You can't continue to, it's versus a speedboat.
Yeah.
You can't just ebb and flow and turn and do 180s or 360s in your culture. It has to be that super tanker or that ocean vessel that is very consistent, that's staying on course.
Yes.
And that's what's going to really help your company be around for the long term.
And it's one thing I hear you talk a lot about is trust. Because when you do this consistently, and to your point, when you are leaning into your culture, even when times are bad, that is trustworthy. That is when people know, oh, you are someone who I can lean into and I can believe and I can count on. And that's a worthy employer. I mean, that is an environment that a lot of people would prefer to be a part of, where trust is something you can count on every single day, not something that they're withholding because they don't know what's going to be the flavor of the moment, any given moment. So I love it. Any final thoughts, anything that we didn't talk? I know you and I could go on and on. We've covered a lot.
We could be here until it gets dark, but we don't want to do that. So I would say that the key thing, I would just say the call to action for leaders listening to this is really about if there's some of the things that, were discussed today, if you don't, as you look and you do a little bit of a self-reflection on your organization, I would say, however you try to solve that, making sure you actually have whoever is leading your people organization, your people focus within the company, really have them do some things about doing a self-assessment on how things are happening from a people perspective.
Yeah.
And we do. We have conversations all the time with people that do not end up to be a client. So if there's any way we can help in giving you some good advice, we're happy to do that. So it's just kind of a joy of doing what we do at HR Catalyst, which is kind of the fun, because if we can equip companies to be more successful than they are, and the amount of companies that are just so high performing out there versus dysfunctional, unfortunately, the amount of companies that are dysfunctional far outweigh the companies that are really really put together.
Yeah.
So if we can help you with some of that, if we can help to have even just a conversation or over coffee or lunch, we're happy to do that and seeing if we can add some value for you. And but really think about the people side of your business, because I would say those smaller to middle-sized companies. And when I was corporate, the last 3 stints I did in a corporate setting were in the middle market space.
Yeah.
And one of the organizations was 1,500 people, 10 different countries, and I was their first strategic HR leader they brought on board.
Wow.
So it had nothing to do with their size or global presence. And so I would just say making sure you you focus on that people side of the business because it goes full circle to what we talked about when we started.
Yeah.
That's where the vast majority of your cost is baked in your people.
Yes.
So whatever you can do to make sure that you're making that employee experience as positive as possible, because that's going to drive engagement, going to drive retention, and that drops down into your top line and your bottom line. So if you don't hear anything else except that part of this interview, it's like, remember that, because your people are driving your cost, and whether they're dysfunctional or disengaged or whether they're high performing, that cost base is still there.
It shows up in your P&L. Holy cow.
Yep. So making sure you do focus on making sure that becomes a point of emphasis, whether you do it now, whether you put it as a big thing to do for 2025, whatever you're thinking about there, make sure that you actually spend some time reflecting on that and looking at making improvements if you need to.
Exactly. I completely agree with what Mark is saying, you guys. Your people keep your brand promise, period. And the cool thing is he nailed it so perfectly that you can win at profit and you can win at purpose at the same time, but it is your people that will help you accomplish that, and taking the people problems head on and figuring out why is this preventing our growth is so absolutely critical, and it is a personally rewarding. So Mark mentioned the assessment. So he does a free assessment, HR Catalyst, but also the Marketing Blender and HR Catalyst together offer an assessment. And there's a full scorecard. And so if you're looking at this more holistically, definitely reach out to us, but we're both here to help you. And thank you guys so much. And Mark, thank you so much
for
sharing all of the wealth of information. And yeah, you guys definitely check him out, follow him. He has an amazing podcast. So thank you so much, Mark. We really appreciate your partnership.
Yeah. Thanks again, Dacia.
Absolutely. Onward and upward.